first one, and then we will see where we are. So,
Okay.
welcome to Economics Happy Hour. My name's Matt,
My name is Jadrian.
Hi, I'm Eric.
and we are thrilled to have you with us. And for regular listeners, you'll know that we have a third person here, Eric Dunaway, repeat visitor to the show. Eric, thanks for joining us again.
Thanks for having me. I mean, I never turned down an offer of baseball.
We we are kind of melting here today. It's June 22nd as we're recording. This is going to drop in a few days on the Thursday, the 26th, I believe, will be the day that this drops. And but Jadrian and Eric, what's new? How have your Junes been going?
Eric, I'll let you go first. How's your June?
Oh, June has been busy. I'm actually learning a lot about venture capital this summer. I've been embedding with a program that is teaching sales to undergrads. So I have become Sandler Sales Certified over the
Hmm,
past month, and I find myself subconsciously using new sales techniques when I'm talking to my children now.
I like it. I like it.
Can you give us an example of one that you've recently done? I'm curious what a sales
Yeah,
technique you've
yeah,
learned.
the conventional wisdom is that, when you're making a sales call, you've got 40% of the time you're going to get, the yes, they're interested if you've done your research and you're calling the right people. 6% of the time you're going to get the no. And that remaining 54% of the time you're going to get that maybe, that, call me second Tuesday of never. Where they don't want to say no, but they don't want to say yes either. And so a lot of the Sandler training is about reducing that 54%. It's that, hey, if you're not willing to say yes, I'm going to be the one that says no. And then we find that they're leveraging a lot of behavioral economics without, it's all applied, of course. But when you're the one who says no to somebody, when you're trying to sell them something, you kind of flip the script, and all of a sudden they're trying to sell you on it. And we find that the amount of sales goes up. So it's really, really fascinating.
Hmm.
But how do you apply it to your kid? That's what I want to know.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So
Okay.
I was in an argument with her the other day, and I was asking her to, kind of admit some wrongdoing, and she didn't want to. She was giving me the silent treatment. So then I shifted it and became the no. It's like, no, I'm not gonna do this anymore. And yeah, it almost happened automatically. It was crazy.
It's interesting.
Nice,
Hmm.
nice. Jadrian, I think last time we spoke was before you had a trip over to the UK. How was the UK?
It was great. I did a lot of the stuff you recommended, so thank you. I appreciate that. I went to London 10 years ago when I was in grad school. But I was only there for like a couple days. I had done like this sort of European tour, like gave talks at places, went to a conference, things like that. So it was really cool to go back. And I think we've talked about this in a previous episode, to go back and do things you did a long time ago with like a newfound appreciation just for life. So I think when I was in grad school, I was just even I don't know why I did this. I went like in the fall of my last year. So I was stressed with I was on vacation, but I was really stressed. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as I should have. Going back, it was really nice to be able to see stuff that I had done
Cool.
before, but actually just appreciate a little bit more.
Was there one specific thing you can point out and say, "But I appreciated this thing more in 2025 relative to whenever it was you went before"?
Public transportation. It was
It's incredible over
it's
there.
incredible. It's absolutely incredible. I just, I think I just sort of I mean, I'd been to New York before, but like I had not appreciated that pretty much anywhere I went, I didn't have to wait more than a couple minutes for a bus or a subway. It was
New York, New York is it can't compare
right.
to London's public
So yeah,
transport.
I stopped in New York and I went down to Brooklyn to go to a baseball game, but to go from Queens to Brooklyn, I had to go through Manhattan, and it was like it was like a whole hour to get down there. And I'm just sitting there thinking, like the London version, I could probably hop on a bus and be there in 20 minutes. I did not appreciate that fully. And now that I'm just older, I really
Very cool.
appreciated a very good public transportation system.
Hmm.
Very cool. And what is the beverage for the episode for both of you?
I can go first. I am finishing off. I think it's my last one. I've got the almost famous pickle beer for Permanis from the East End Brewing Company.
Yeah.
Now I really do need to clean out the fridge. So I'm
I
getting
just
there.
actually finished mine off. It's the brand new flavor of Mountain Dew, the Summer Freeze zero sugar version. That's a
Okay. I'm having a Moscow Mule. Had this before. Had a little bit of a light one. It's a little bit earlier in the day, but it's kind of a refreshing drink for a day where the heat index is over 100. So it works out well. So today we wanted to talk a little bit about Bobby Bonilla Day. And Bobby Bonilla Day, well, we're bringing Eric on to talk about it because when we had talked to Eric on the podcast a couple of years ago, I think this came up that when Bobby Bonilla Day came up, he'd love to jump on. Eric, do you want to give the overview for the listeners who might not know what are we talking about when we talk about Bobby Bonilla Day?
Yeah, so first we got to start with Bobby Bonilla himself. He was one of the great players in Major League Baseball in the early 1990s. At one point, he was the highest paid player, making about $6 million a year, which doesn't seem like a lot today, but back in the early 90s, that was huge for a baseball player. And Bobby Bonilla Day came about because in 2000, the Mets were ready to release Bobby Bonilla. He was almost 40 at that time. He had aged, father time had taken its toll. But the problem was the Mets owed Bobby Bonilla $5.9 million, and they didn't want to pay him right away. And we'll talk about why shortly. And so they negotiated a deferred contract settlement where they didn't pay Bobby Bonilla anything for 10 years. And then starting in 2011, on July 1st of every year, starting in 2011 until 2035, they pay Bobby Bonilla about $1.19 million. And if you add that up, that's about $29.8 million. And so every July 1st, ESPN celebrates Bobby Bonilla Day, which is when he gets his next check. And it's always fascinating to see people like, why would the Mets agree to this deal? Introducing some finance into baseball.
Yeah, one of the more unique contracts. I know, like, there are actually, I mean, the idea of deferred compensation, it actually comes up with CEOs. It comes up
Mm-hmm.
sometimes with college presidents as well. Some of the compensation might be deferred, but it's pretty rare to the point where I don't know of another case like this in sports, other than
So
maybe a contract will have dead years on it or something like that. I don't, do
they've
you
become a
know?
lot more common. In fact,
Oh, okay.
Bobby Bonilla's wasn't even the biggest of the time.
Really?
The biggest one was actually Steve Young from the defunct American Football League, the AFL. They basically, I don't exactly remember the number, but I think it
Hmm.
was in the order of 25 to $50 million that they owed him, and they deferred that one out. And we're finding that a lot of modern uh, professional baseball players, they are getting these deferred contract
Okay.
settlements.
Yeah,
hmm
yeah.
Ken Griffey Jr. just finished one with his one with the Reds, just expired. I know Ichiro Suzuki. I'm a Mariners fan, so these are all my Mariners guys. Ichiro Suzuki is still on one as well, but yeah, we're seeing them, and they're not really a bad idea if you're a professional athlete.
Yeah. So you had, Eric, you had mentioned, and I'll give either of you a chance to try to respond. You'd mentioned
hmm
that a lot of people are saying, why would the Mets do this? You know,
hmm
that's a good question. So I'll
Yeah.
ask, what would be the justification for, did the Mets make a horrible, horrible decision here?
Well, we're gonna have to unpack that one because this has some layers. Okay, so I'm gonna take the poker mentality for this one because we've done poker on this before, and we have to think about what we knew at the time that we made the decision. So it's 2000. The Mets have the $5.9 million that they owe Bobby Bonilla, but it's tied up in financial markets. It's not liquid. And they realize that in taking this deferred contract settlement with Bobby Bonilla, they'd have to pay him 8% on the annuity. So that's the interest rate they're being charged, 8%. However, the way they look at it, that money that's tied up in the markets is earning them 12%. And furthermore, they don't have to make any payments on that money for 10 years. So they get 12% for 10 years, and then they start making payments. And that's in the world of finance, that's an easy 4% right there that they're going to be making money on. And that was the whole justification for it. That's what they knew at the time, of course. So,
Well, I mean, assuming a 12% interest rate is a little bit bonker. I mean, it's happened. And what were they relying that on? Were they thinking because they'd looked at the last 6 years, which was the run-up of the dot-com bubble, and this was the 12% they thought they'd get?
well, this was where the story gets really interesting because the person who was managing the Mets' money, he was this legendary financier in New York in the early 2000s. You might have heard of him. He went by the name of Bernie Madoff.
Ooh, it's not good.
No, that's not good. So he was telling the Mets that they were earning 12% on their money. But as when I say that name, we three instantly know the actual amount that the Mets were earning on that money was 0% because Bernie Madoff was running a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so when this went down, with the Mets and with Bernie Madoff, the Mets actually tried to throw this deferred contract settlement in with the Madoff litigation, but the New York judge at the time, kind of just laughed them out of court and said, "Nah, you made this decision separate of that. It doesn't matter that you thought you
Yeah.
were getting 12%."
Well, and if you look from like 96, I was just looking at the S&P 500 chart.
Hmm.
You look from 96 to 2000, the S&P 500 basically doubled. So
Yeah,
that it was over, I mean, in that 4 year time period, the 12% wouldn't have been outrageous. And if you look since since the beginning of 20, if you thought from like fall 2022 until now, right? The S&P 500 was about 3,600 at one point in fall of 2022, and it's close to 6,000 now. You would think, oh yeah, I mean,
yeah.
but then you could find other periods that that doesn't happen. So
So if we, remove that Bernie Madoff assumption right here, and let's actually let's add an assumption. Let's assume they were actually getting 12%. I've actually have it all worked out. I give this as an exercise to my students. Over the 35 years of this deferred contract settlement, the Mets would have profited $152 million off of that 5.9 initial investment.
if they could earn 12%.
If they'd actually been earning 12%, it would have grown so much over those first 10 years that the
Hmm.
interest on that alone would have covered the payments to Bobby Bonilla and then
Interesting.
some. So,
Interesting. And
yeah.
what is it was in, I mean, I haven't run the numbers on a
Mhm.
Excel chart or anything. Is the break even percentage on this annuity 8%?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
For Bobby Bonilla, it calculates perfectly to an 8%
Yeah.
annuity.
And I mean, take a step back here, and then Jadrian, let you chime in with your thoughts. But just for I think most listeners will probably understand this, but this is a form of what financial advisors or financial companies would call an annuity,
Hmm.
where you can take a lump sum of money and you could go on and buy, anybody can go on and buy an annuity right now, where you take some lump sum of money and you cash it in. But for cashing it in, you will get a stream of payments that could either start immediately or start at some point in the future. That stream of payments could go on, often it could go on forever. A common way annuities can be used is basically to hedge against longevity risk. So if you are worried about how long you might live, perhaps you might want to get an annuity.
Hmm.
And then you are guaranteed a stream of income for the rest of your life instead of having a lump sum, which you're afraid you may run out of. So that just wanted to take a step back and define that. So Jadrian, when you hear of Bobby Bonilla Day and all of this, what are your thoughts on this?
It reminds me, every time this comes up, it reminds me so much of my labor economics course. Because one of the most challenging concepts, I guess, in that section is essentially these ideas of like net present value, annuities, future payments. And it is such a hard thing for, it's such a hard thing for anybody to wrap their heads around, but even college students. This idea that you're getting something in the future, what's the value of it today, that sort of stuff. And I have always wondered, and I don't know the answer to this. Eric, maybe you do. Um, why don't the Mets just buy out the rest of the annuity? Like, why continue to pay this when we're clearly not making 8%, even if they had to pay it up front? It's I don't know how much is left. I mean, it's 25 years, so
Yeah,
he's
till
got 10 years left.
2035. Yep. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know
Yeah.
why the Mets are doing it. I mean, I imagine it's they're probably making a lot from publicity just from this. But is it good publicity? Because most people think this was a terrible deal for the Mets, which you factor Bernie Madoff in, yeah, it was a terrible
Mhm.
deal for the Mets. But at the same time, there are cases where these deferred contract settlements have been bought out.
Yeah.
The Steve Young instance, his was eventually settled, and he got the payout.
I've
Well,
always been curious, just in I mean, baseball teams' payrolls are hundreds of millions of dollars. It's not that much to buy it out and just get it done with. But I guess in terms of you only paying 1 million a year,
yeah,
you're minimizing the hit to your payroll.
Hmm.
I have two possible the two justifications I could come up with.
Okay.
One would be the fact that yeah, it's a million. It's such a fraction on the their total expense. They're like whatever, let's just go. They probably that's point one. Point two, maybe they are not allowed to buy it out. I mean, I'm sure if you make an offer, but my guess is they're not just automatically allowed to buy it out. They would have to work with Bonilla on coming up with a contract. The third, and this is kind of interesting, and it's throwing in somebody, but the owner now is Steve Cohen,
Hmm.
who's one of the most kind of a very famous hedge fund manager who got incredible returns. And we'll come back to him in the pop culture recommendation section. I have something on him that I want to bring up, but the and this guy's a billionaire, and once again the million might be a rounding error for the salary, and then Cohen might's like, I don't care, I'll just what that's I think Cohen's paid over 100 million for a work of art before, so the
Yeah.
million a year is like whatever.
Right, so then I think that goes back to Eric's point is, well, okay, assuming that they could buy it out, which they're financially speaking, right? They can. Somebody would take it over for the right price. Is it purely from an advertising standpoint that every year we're reminded that the Mets did this and that somehow what's the benefit of paying that $1 million? And if I'm Bobby Bonilla, I mean, I guess in some senses, if you're Bobby Bonilla, you definitely want to keep getting $1 million every year because your
Hmm.
name keeps popping up every time. I don't know.
So yeah, like
It's interesting, right? Like, why does it continue when it doesn't have to in the grand scheme of professional baseball where it's so small?
when this happened, Bobby Bonilla was 37 years old. And by the time it's completely paid out, he'll be 72. Like from the perspective of, someone like Bobby Bonilla, this is an incredible retirement for him. But, it does dry up when he's 72.
Yeah. So then, okay, so if we're talking about why did the Mets do it, then the second question is, and maybe the answer is just super obvious, but was this a good deal for Bobby Bonilla as well?
So that is where another interesting thing, because, 8%, it's pretty average. If we're,
I disagree with you on that one.
yeah, okay.
8%, this is an 8% risk-free return base. I mean, it's not quite
Yeah,
risk-free,
yeah.
but I think it'd be more like corporate bond ratings, which you don't get 8% on a corporate bond.
You know, I'm going to admit I was using some hindsight knowledge when I said average, because if we look at the S&P for the
Yep.
last 20 years, it's just above 8%.
Sure, sure. Yep, yep,
Yeah.
yep.
So, you know, if he'd had the money and thrown it in the S&P, he'd have a tiny bit more money than he has right now. But
Yeah,
again, when you factor in the risk-free and factor in the thing that I just said, that knowing it was 8%, yeah,
yeah.
it's a
Yeah,
good
yeah.
deal.
No, and I do think, yeah, I think 8% guaranteed is a pretty incredible deal. Could he maybe have gotten more? And I think the long run return is slightly more than 8%.
Hmm.
I mean, starting at 2000 was kind of a bad year to start, right? That it's
Yeah.
so I mean, but a guaranteed 8% yield. I mean, when don't you get paid if the Mets go defunct? I
Yeah.
mean, it's I think that's pretty interesting. And in some ways, we talk about behavioral economics a lot. if he gets that money initially, there's ways he could screw up and
Hmm.
the money's gone. And unfortunately, and we know from ESPN's broke, far too many athletes do end up screwing up and squandering their fortune. And this is a great way, no matter what he did, he gets $1 million now
Yeah.
for this set of period of time. So I honestly, even if the money didn't make complete sense, even if he was losing a percent or two, I could make a really good argument that this was a great move by Bonilla.
Yeah. The fact that he had to wait 10 years before he could touch any of it. I mean, that is huge for a professional athlete.
He had to just live off of whatever he made during his career, which was, I don't know how much, but I know it was a lot.
Hmm.
Plenty.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so then, okay, Matt, let's say you get close to retirement. I mean, you're of the three of us, you're the closest to retirement.
Yep. Yep.
Would you take a Bobby Bonilla payout in your deanship role if they were like, Matt, we want you to retire early. We'll pay you in 10 years. We'll give you not $1 million a year, but
Yeah. 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 If I would get like if we just take all of the stuff out of it, let's say I was ready to move on from whatever, and it's a lump sum payout, or they offered, we don't want to pay you anything, but we'll wait 10 years and then we'll give you 8% for some period. It'll work out to an 8%. Yeah, I would take a guaranteed
Hmm.
8%. Um, I mean, that's a great yield.
I'm going to say this in a very kind way. And I
Yeah.
want you to know that I don't mean this the way that it's about to come out. Even given your age, you would.
Yeah.
No,
No, but I
I
mean,
was
like it
mentally going
depends.
like, how
Yeah.
can I say this without offending
Well,
Matt?
no. So I mean, I will turn 49 on Wednesday. So
Mhm.
actually, when this drops, it'll be the day after my birthday.
So yes,
Uh,
this is where I'm going, right? So let's say you're 50. Let's
yep.
say you decide to retire at 50.
Well, yeah, it depends on the number of years for
Right.
it,
So
right? I mean,
right, would you wait 10 years for a 25-year payment?
well, if the money, like, let's say if I were to die before it comes up, there's got to be some language in there, right?
My guess is your
Uh,
family just gets it. It probably just
yeah,
transfers I mean, it's an
transfers
asset that,
over or
right.
something, right? I mean, but if it is just an 8% rate of return, let's just move it to that. And then there are annuities that basically say we will wait 10 years and then you get this amount of money for every year for the rest of your life. And it's a bit of a gamble, but you could have it where on average it's 8%. I would take that in a heartbeat. I would take a safe return of 8%. Um, yeah, I would think that's a good yield. And I don't think inflation will creep up so much to make that not worthwhile, right? I mean that's where the gamble comes in.
Yeah, it's just that whole idea of just like you were saying before, reducing or completely eliminating the risk. Yeah, the only risk at that point is inflation. But yeah, it does seem like a great deal.
So I'll flip that question around. So you said you think it's a great deal.
Mhm.
Jadrian, what about you? Would you, or
Yeah.
are you a market wizard and you're like, I can't take 8%?
No, no. So I always think about this in the context of like winning the lottery because every time the numbers get to those just massive values and they start talking about do you take the lump sum payment or do you take the annuity? Like a little part of me, I'm like, take the annuity, of course. I want to get paid over. I'm irresponsible and I want to make sure I'm getting paid every year. And I sit there and I go, I want all the money now. I think and I don't know why because I am a pretty frugal person, but I feel like I'd want the money to be able to determine how I'm going to invest that money rather than, but at the same time, right? Bobby Bonilla made plenty of money. I'm sure he had plenty in his bank account that he could play around with. So I think that's obviously the difference. But a little part of me, I feel like I'd want the money up front so that I could figure out what to do with it.
Well,
Funny
I think
enough,
that I think a lot of it comes down to what other money you have, and
Yeah.
he
mhm.
had a lot, and then what the rate of the return is. I think on the lottery, the rate of return is not 8%. I think it's
No, it's whatever the 30-year bond is or
is that
whatever.
about what they go
Mhm.
by? Okay.
And the funny thing about the lottery as well with the 20-year or half upfront option is that it actually doesn't matter how big the cash pot is. It's again, it's the interest rate that'll determine whether you should take it upfront or the annuity. And lo and behold, that also comes out to exactly 8%.
The lottery is an
Mhm.
8%. You
Yeah,
do eight.
it's where you break even, whether you get half
Okay.
immediately or you take it over 20 years. It's
Yeah.
8%.
Yeah, and I mean you raised a good point though, I think, Jadrian, on like whether to accept or not, do you have something you'd want to do with the money?
Hmm.
Like maybe if you got 50 million now versus whatever 100 million spread out over 20 years, maybe there's a company you want to buy for 12 million dollars or something.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is, and that's a little bit more difficult to do if the money is spread out, or maybe you just, it's Bonilla clearly had plenty of funds to do okay for a while, and he didn't think he needed that 6 million at the moment.
So
You
that
know, we say that, and I just Googled this 'cause I was very curious. Eric, maybe this is where you were going with this. We forget that the old salaries in Major League Baseball were not the same as the new salaries. Bobby Bonilla's career earnings were only, in the context of professional sports, this is very small, were only $46 million, dollars, which again is a ton of money. But in the context of today's professional sports, over an entire career, he really didn't actually make that much money.
yeah. In comparison, Shohei Ohtani is getting
Yeah, right. In
almost twice
comparison
that
to
this year.
Yes, in comparison to current, and we do this all the time when we talk about like salaries and values. I'm sitting there going like 46 million. That's not that much. That's tiny. Um, but yeah, in the grand scheme of professional, but like exactly what you said, right? With the broke idea, baseball players not being, or any athlete not being really responsible. Maybe he didn't have as much money as we think he did, and he was like, "This is a way to guarantee that I am responsible." It's a great, as Matt likes to say, it's a great commitment mechanism. Would this be
Hmm.
appropriate?
Yeah.
Mechanism.
Right? Let me commit to
Yeah.
getting my payments so that I don't squander it all.
Hmm.
Eric, sorry, I interrupted
Sometimes,
you. Go
no,
ahead.
no, sometimes, yeah, in behavioral economics, we like to talk about that sometimes we're better off when we have a choice taken away, you know, because we are impatient creatures. And so it's kind of that weird, that counterintuitive. People can be happier with less choices. What? But that's why things like layaway exist. But yeah,
Yeah.
getting back to kind of Matt's point, this idea of winning the lottery, taking that lump sum now because there was a company you wanted to buy. When he said that, it got me thinking about, the whole corporate finance ideology. Like we don't actually necessarily need to have the interest rate be 8%. If we have opportunities that we think can yield 8% or better, then of course we'd want to take the money right now because
Yeah.
yeah, it just
Yeah,
it's
it could yield it,
investments.
or it could be not even a monetary yield. Maybe that 50 million, there's a gift you'd want to give to, your alma mater or something, and you're like, wow, if I give 10 million, that I get to change lives this way. And it's not a
Hmm.
monetary return, but it's a non-return. I was thinking, and then I looked this up, and at least what the AI says is different. I was thinking, uh, something I don't think Bonilla would have thought of me necessarily at the time is the fact that people are going to still be talking about him in 2025, right? I mean, it's kind of crazy. So it's like maybe this has had a positive value on his speaker fee, right? To come through and do that. But an AI overview says you could have him come speak for $5,000 to $10,000, and now I'm thinking, man, I might need to inquire on that and have Bobby Bonilla come and talk about the value of annuities and all of that stuff. So uh, I would have thought his speaker fee might have been a little bit more than that, to be honest.
Well, Eric, I think now that you brought up the opportunity cost thing, I think it is, especially a lot of today's deferred annuities are around payrolls. And so teams have can this is always where it gets there's always I think sports always really annoys me when I have to teach it to my sports econ class because there's these rules that nobody follows. And so I'll say that there's a rule in baseball that you're not supposed to spend above a certain amount. If you do, you're taxed above that amount. And so a lot of the deferred annuities today are ways to get under the salary cap.
Hmm.
And so the idea, going back to your idea of opportunity cost, is that if I don't have to pay you a big chunk now, I could pay you in 10 years. I'm technically giving you zero today, and I'll hire somebody else instead.
And
And
we
so I
could
think
win a World Series
hopefully win a
today.
World Series or a Super Bowl, right? That's always the story.
Hmm.
I think LeBron James had done these salary cuts. They weren't deferred payments, but I think Tom Brady had done a salary cut. LeBron James had done a salary cut. The idea was they were going to win a championship. And so I think some owners do this as well from like an opportunity cost standpoint, not from an investment of money, but from a maybe we can spend the money on getting good players. So I'm looking up all this data in the background because it's so funny dollar wise, how different things were in the year 2000 versus today. So the Mets, so their 2000 payroll the year after was $80 million. And the year before it had been $93 million. And so they saved a big chunk, but it wasn't just Bobby Bonilla. Compared to today, their payroll is like $300 million.
Yeah,
And the Mets were actually pretty good those years. Weren't they in the World Series 2001?
it was something around that time. I
Yeah.
remember there was the Subway Series. The
Hmm.
Mets played the Yankees, and I can't remember if plus or minus the year 2000 by a couple years.
Yeah. It's
Google could
within
help us out, I'm
within
sure.
three.
Yeah.
I think Jadrian's looking it up.
I'm looking it up. So I know that they did go pretty deep, like in 2000. No, I'm thinking 2015, 2016. I know that they had done really well, but I am looking it up to see.
2000. It was
Yeah.
2000. They played the Subway Series as they,
Hmm.
because it was the Mets versus the Yankees. So the now fascinating the idea of annuities move going forward. I love the idea of annuities in general. I the problem I have with annuities in the real world. So this is the is I know finance companies, if somebody sells an annuity, they get a massive commission, which tells you those who take the annuities really aren't getting a quote unquote fair price. And of course, the companies that are selling you the annuity need to make profit to do that. But how much are they making? Uh, Annuities, I love in theory the idea that you could guarantee if you had some pot of money, you could put it in an annuity and then you would be guaranteed a stream of payments for the rest of your life. But given how much in commissions and the profits, so much of it's taken off. I likely will never buy one because I will think the value is too poor on those unless
And
somebody
you're
wants to give me an 8% later.
yeah, and you're also very capable of calculating the present value of that annuity and comparing it to the price.
Yeah, yeah. I figure for retirement, I'll basically be creating my own annuity and
Hmm.
trying to figure it out. But
It
uh,
it's been kind of fun. So I teach all of this when I'm teaching Econ 101. So at Wabash, where I teach, we do micro and macro together in one semester. But I spend a week giving an introduction to finance, and we always talk about Bobby Bonilla. And it's just seeing these, college freshmen, sophomores that have no idea what an annuity is. The only experience they've ever had with a loan is their student loans that they have looked at once and haven't looked at since. And so this thinking about how that value changes. But I think one of the most fun things for me about teaching this is I will get probably 15 emails on July 1st this year from former students wishing me a happy Bobby Bonilla Day, and I look forward to that every year. And so,
that is
lots of
very cool.
fun.
That is very cool. Any before we get to the pop culture, any kind of closing thoughts or words of wisdom on Bobby Bonilla or Bobby Bonilla Day?
If your financier's telling you that you're getting
This
12%,
is where I was going. That's what I was thinking.
you need to
Oh,
verify that.
it is all it just again in hindsight, right? It's so funny to think of how many people believed that he was that capable of those sorts of returns. I hear it. I walk around campus all the time and hear these students who are talking to their friend about how they're going to make a ton of money because they found some shortcut that they know about investing. And I'm just sitting here going like, "Oh my God, I please don't be in charge of anyone's retirement account."
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, because like little parts of me, I'm like, if I think about this, we talked about sports betting before the show started, mentioned it, I think about this same thing. Like, if you think you found a secret, why are you not putting all of your money into it? Why are you just doing a little bit? Because
Uh,
you know it's not like a deep down, you know it's not that promised. And I just
I'll
go
I'll
ahead.
double down on that with the context of if it's such a great investment opportunity, why are they advertising it on
Oh,
YouTube?
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The 12% they saw was a mirage. The Yeah, that's probably a good way before we get to the pop culture. So, um, I have a couple examples of pop culture that I'd love to integrate, that I'd love to discuss. I can let either of y'all go first, or I'm happy to go first if you need time to think about your pop culture for the week. Okay.
I'm ready. I did my homework.
All right. Okay, Eric, what do we
Well,
have?
let's let Eric go
So,
first in case
so
it's one of ours.
yeah, of course, since we're talking about baseball, we had to have to think about favorite baseball movies. I mean, that's what I came armed with, and I could only narrow it down to two. I had favorite and I had best.
Ooh.
So, as an economist, I feel like I'm obligated to say the best baseball movie is Moneyball. Naturally, of course, the book, I like the book better. The movie's fantastic. Book is absolutely
Yeah.
fantastic as well, but it's not my favorite baseball movie. That the baseball movie that holds my heart more than any other is Major League.
Hey, I would have said Major League too. Um, I love that movie. I haven't seen it in years, but
Mhm.
Wild Thing, Ricky Vaughn.
Love it.
Have you seen Major League, Jadrian?
No.
Bob
Oh,
Uecker and Charlie Sheen, Tom
Oh wait, no.
Berenger, Rene
I'm
Russo.
looking at pictures. I'm looking at covers of baseball movies now. I have seen Major League. Yes.
Okay, okay.
fantastic. I also
This is
watched that movie, 100 times.
well, this
Yeah.
is good. Then I can disagree with you because I think the best baseball movie is A League of Their Own.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm
Another
a big
great
Tom
baseball
Hanks
movie.
fan. I love it. It's a good
that's
story.
fair. That's
There's no
fair.
crying in baseball.
I'll go different from the movies. Just these are a couple things we brought up during the conversation today. So a couple books. Normally in the pop culture, I don't bring up books, but Steve Cohen, who owns the Mets, there's a book that I recently read, and it's clear the person writing it is maybe a little bit biased against Cohen, but it seems reasonably accurate. I don't know. Called Black Edge, and pretty fascinating look into the world of Cohen and hedge funds. And there's some pretty crazy stories in there, like when Steve Wynn put his hand through $100 million painting and just like stuff. It's a pretty crazy story. So that's one book. And then speaking of Bernie Madoff, book called The Wizard of Lies was a
Hmm.
very interesting read, and it actually gets you. I don't find it that difficult to believe that people could fall for schemes like this. I, you go through the whole thing, and a few people are making money, and I mean, if you think about it, that 12% was actually less than the average market return, and he was just promising steady, slow returns.
Mhm.
And then some people are
Some
getting
people got paid, right?
Well, and they're getting the people are getting the checks, and then they're like, well, yeah, if my neighbor is doing this, clearly it's okay, and then it just builds up, and so I don't think it's that tricky to fall prey to things like that. But those are a couple good. I think they were both good books if you're looking at learning more about either Bernie Madoff or Steve Cohen.
I've put them both on my Goodreads.
Awesome, awesome. And then was yours A League of Their Own, Jadrian? Was that
Yes. Oh
your?
yeah. League of
Oh,
Their Own.
okay, okay.
That's the best. That's the best baseball movie.
Great. Well, thank you to everybody for listening. And this is dropping, of course, Thursday, June 26th. So please celebrate Bobby Bonilla Day responsibly on July 1st.
I was gonna
Oh,
say, make sure you said the date. It's coming out on July 1st.
coming on July 1st. But thank you for listening. Please 5-star review. Send us an email or comment. We love show suggestions. This came up because Eric said we need to do a show on Bobby Bonilla Day. So we would love to hear from you on whatever topics you would like us to cover. Any closing words of wisdom?
This pickle beer is still very good.
Awesome. Awesome.
Stay cool out there. It's a hot one.
Yeah. Well, take care, everybody. Until next time. Cheers.
Cheers.